held as part of the scoping phase of the environmental impact assessment for Eskom's proposed nuclear power plant. Just for everyone's interest, at this stage, no decisions have been taken. And the purpose of the project tonight is really to listen carefully, to record all insights and inputs received from all our stakeholders, and to ensure that these are considered by the specialists during the impact assessment. We acknowledge that there is quite a lot of historic information available, but while that is the case, a lot of information has changed since the previous environmental impact assessment, and the team is investigating and looking at additional new information, and that is why it is quite important for us to understand. Could I ask you to just please mute your computers? Thank you. And that's why it's quite important for us to understand your issues that are being raised. Right, before we continue, I would just like to introduce the team members. The applicant in this case is Eskom, and from Eskom's side, we will have Deirdre Harps and Sadiqa Toffee. And then WSP Group Africa has been appointed as the independent environmental assessment practitioner, and the presentation will be done by Ashley Strong, and she will be supported by Brian Hayes. Could I just check with our admin if you could just mute the participants before we continue? Right, we can move on to the next slide. Thank you. Just then in terms of meeting conduct and participation guidelines, because we are online, I would just need to set a few simple guidelines so that we can manage our discussion fairly. So when we open the floor for discussion, I'm going to ask you to please raise your hand. There is a function for that on the virtual meeting. And then I will call you on participants in sequence. Please also feel free to put your comments in the chat. There's quite a lot of people online. I see on my side 78. There may not be time to address all the comments in the chat. Therefore, I would like to assure everyone that all the comments in the chat will be recorded. This meeting is also being recorded as part of the public participation process proceedings, and we will also generate minutes after the meeting that will be made available to all the key stakeholders. All the issues, comments, questions, and inputs will be captured as part of the comments and responses report, and they will be responded to as part of that report. It will also form part of the final scoping report that will be submitted to the Department of Forestry, Fisheries and the Environment, who is the competent authority for this project. Right, so I'm also going to ask you to just please keep your inputs concise and focused so that we can give as many people as possible an opportunity to raise their questions. And then I'm also going to ask everyone to keep your questions to a maximum of 2 at a time. If we run over time or if we need to move to other participants, I may step in, and this is not to cut you short. It's really just to ensure that we give fair access to everyone. Right, so in terms of the, we can move on to the next slide. In terms of the structure of tonight's meeting, Ashley will be sharing the regulatory context of the project, and then we will hand over to Eskom, the applicant, and they'll provide us with a brief project overview. And at that stage, we'll hand back to Ashley again for an overview of the specialist studies that will be undertaken as part of the impact assessment phase. And this is really why your input will be important tonight, to ensure that your issues and questions can interrogate the terms of reference of the specialist studies to make sure that those issues are considered, evaluated, and assessed in the study. So the presentation is not that long. We will open the floor for discussion after the presentation. I think we can move on to the next slide. And then just the purpose of today is really to provide information about Eskom's proposal to develop a nuclear power plant. I've mentioned that this meeting is part of the scoping phase, so this means that we may not necessarily be able to address all the comments that are, or the questions that are raised tonight. Some of those questions will need to transfer into the impact assessment phase because they may be critical for the specialists to assess and evaluate and consider. And then it's really to present an opportunity for you to raise your issues, different perspectives that you may have, and any insights and local knowledge that you can share. I just want to mention that this is the heart of public participation, is really for us to listen to the diversity of perspectives that are raised by our participants and to really understand the scope of concerns. And I think with that was my last slide. Ashley, I think I can hand over to the project team for a short overview of the project, and then we'll open the floor for discussions. Thank you very much.
Thank you so much. Can I just get a thumbs up that everyone can hear me? Tumi, we're getting thumbs up? Thanks. I can't see the meeting, so Tumelo will let me know if there's any issues. All right, so why are we here? Tony has already said that WCP is undertaking the environmental impact assessment process for a nuclear power facility for 5,200 megawatts. This has come a long way. There has been a nuclear power facility EIA done some time back, starting for the Nuclear 1 facility, which was authorized on the 11th of October 2017. After a fairly lengthy appeal process, the appeals were dismissed and the original decision upheld on the 29th of July last year. That particular site is for the Danafontein site, which is located next door to the Coburg facility, which is existing and has been operated by Eskom for the last 40 years. In terms of where this project fits in with policies and plans, the National Energy Policy for South Africa from June 2008 looks at or states that nuclear energy shall be used in South Africa's diversifications of primary energy sources. This is also then linked to the National Development Plan for 2030, which also emphasizes a diverse and secure, sustainable energy mix, which does look at promoting the investigation of nuclear power. And then from there, the Integrated Resource Plan from last year, that was published last year, also looks at the use of nuclear power in the future energy scenarios, and has actually included the requirement for 5,200 megawatts of new nuclear power to be added to the mix by 2039, and then also possibly increasing this in the future to age. The 2039 5,200 megawatts is what is being looked at in terms of the IRP. Where we sit is in the application process for this nuclear facility. We are looking in the green block in the environmental authorization. This is the EIA that we all are aware of. We feed into a heritage permit application process, which has actually been started. The relevant application forms have been submitted to both Eastern Cape and to SARA. Two project applications and permits that will follow on from the EIA are the water use license application and the coastal waters discharge permit. Both of these require certain specialist studies, and those specialist studies are being included in the specialist studies that are being undertaken in the EIA, so that those studies can feed into these processes at a later stage. On the right-hand side of your screen is the nuclear site license application, and this is a standalone process, but it is running concurrently. It doesn't link to the EIA in any way. It is running concurrently and separately. It's a process run by the National Nuclear Regulator. They will also then have their own public participation process or comments, a public review and comments process, I believe later in the year. So something for everybody just to look out for. In terms of the EIA process and the timeframes, as we discussed, we did mention it last year in our virtual meetings and also at our meetings earlier this month, and also in April. We are working under the new EIA regulations, which are very governed by timeframes. There's timeframes for the environmental assessment practitioner. There's timeframes for the public for review periods. There's also timeframes, very specific timeframes for the authorities themselves for their reviews. We submitted our application in April this year, or actually the last day of March this year, and the report was, the draft scoping report was put out for a period of 30 days. You will now be aware of communication from our side that this 30-day process, or sort of say review period, has been extended. So it was from the 1st of April to the 5th of May, but that has now been extended to the 25th of May. So there is some extra time for people to review and comment. This will then have us submitting our final scoping report to the department a little bit later than originally thought. So it will be in June, with a decision that the department will need to review that report within 44 days of that submission, and give us their outcome on the final scoping report. Moving forward then, should that report be approved, we move into the EIA phase, where later in the year there will be a second review period for people to review the draft EIA report. And then subsequent to that, the final EIA report would be submitted, and the department would have between 57 and 107 days to review that final report, depending on whether the SIP or Strategic Infrastructure Project application that Eskom has initiated is successful or not. Post the receipt of the environmental authorization, there will be an appeal period of 20 days thereafter. So that's just in terms of the EIA process, noting that we're right up front in the scoping phase. So there's still a lot of work to be done. Public participation. We, at the beginning of April, we had just on 10,000 stakeholders. That has significantly grown over the last month and a bit. I think we're closer to almost 12,000 now. So we are trying our best to make sure that we engage across all languages, cultures, and through different ways to make it as easy as possible for people. I think it's key to just note that there's hard copy versions of the report in libraries and public places around the country. There's also the data, the website, WSP website, and our data-free website, which can also be used. It is important to know, and I think Tony has already mentioned this earlier, but every single comment that is received is captured and is responded to in our comment and response report, which will be there in the final scoping report once it is submitted. And also that doesn't mean that stops people from commenting. The comments can still come in even after that final report is submitted, because we then continue capturing and responding to those comments into the draft EIA report and into the final EIA report. In terms of the overall permitting process, we are doing a full scoping and EIA process. We have a number of different listed activities that we've identified to date. We may add to these as the project progresses, but at the moment we are triggering at least a number of listing notice 2 activities, which are the particular environmental impact reporting process to be undertaken. A full list of these activities and the applicability of each one is included in Chapter 7 of the scoping report. And I want to hand over now to Sadiqa, and just to check that he's ready for us.
Good evening, everybody. Can you confirm, Ashley, if you can hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, brilliant. Thanks. Okay, so I'm just going to go over the key project components and really what we're looking at from Eskom's side in terms of the technology that we are planning to deploy. What we have in front of us is really we're just going through a schematic layout of the major components on the plant. I'm just going to explain briefly what we will be doing and installing on the plant as part of this process. In terms of the key deliverables of what we're really looking at and what we are going to achieve, I think we start in the bottom left corner. There's a little fission reaction that we do depict out on the slide, and really we're showing the fission reaction where a neutron is bombarded into a uranium atom. The uranium atom then consequently splits into 2 atoms. That process delivers 2 critical components for us. One is another neutron that impacts the following uranium atom and repeats the action, and that's what we call the fission chain reaction that then goes on until we stop the reaction. The next important part is the energy that's given off in the form of heat, which is what we use to heat up water in what we call the primary circuit, but it's in the fuel and in the reactor core. And that's the part shown by the fuel rods and the control rods in the purple schematic part of the diagram. And that water flows through the primary circuit, what we call, and it goes through a steam generator. And the function of the steam generator is important. It's got 2 main functions. The first function is it cools off the water that's coming in contact with the reactor, and circulates back to the reactor, and cools off that water. So that heat that's generated in the reactor is cooled off by the steam generator, and the water returns back, and that water is in a closed loop and being controlled by the operators appropriately. The other important function of the steam generator is it generates steam, as the name implies. So the water in the tubes heats up in the steam generator, and the steam is taken over through to the turbine, where it spins the turbine, which in turn turns the turbine generator and produces electricity for us, which is what goes through the electrical transmission lines and what we enjoy as electricity at home in the process. That water that does come off from the turbine is also then cooled off in the condenser, and it returns back to the steam generator, and that's the blue circuit that we see. So from the condenser back to the turbine, heats up, produces steam. Steam then turns the turbine, and out comes electricity. The next important part is the third cycle that we call the open loop process, where water from the sea, in what we're looking at, is used to cool off the water in the condenser. and then that's returned to the ocean, and that's an open cycle. We'll be using the cold seawater to cool off the water in the condenser. The critical note here is if we look at the diagram, the purple circuit and the blue circuit and the green circuit are not in contact with each other. The water doesn't touch each other. More importantly, the green water flow from the ocean is not at all in contact with the purple schematic in the containment building. So the water is completely separated and from each other in this process. And this is a process that's typical of a pressurized water reactor design that we have. Can we have the next slide, please?
Sorry, Sadiqa, just before you continue, I just want to confirm that we did check the lobby. I see that there is concern that there are people in the waiting room. We have let them in now. They are in the meeting, so thank you for highlighting that. Thanks, Sadiqa.
Okay, thank you. Can I continue?
Yes, you may continue. Thank you.
Okay, so from the schematic in the first diagram, this diagram is just giving you a pictorial view of the typical components and what it looks like, and also I'll highlight some differences to what we normally would see. So we start off in the middle of the picture, the nuclear island, which houses the reactor, the steam generators within the containment structure, which is normally a 1 meter thick structure. That houses all the safety components and the reactor within that. And that's what we call the nuclear island. It's connected at the bottom to the power block, which houses the turbine and the electricity generators. And then cabling coming out from the generator through to the electrical infrastructure on site, where we will have the high voltage transformer yards and the transmission lines and coming out from the station into the national grid. So those will be the main components in terms of the power generation. What we will also have on the Dayspan side or on the bottom slide is as a part of the design is we're planning to use desalinated water for the water needs on the plant. So there will be some water storage reservoirs on site, as well as a desalination plant. And the intent really is to be self-sufficient in the power station in terms of water infrastructure, to not rely on the municipality's requirements and use up important municipal water supplies. We will also have the intake and outflow structures within the ocean, and there will be some temporary coffer dams that will be constructed during the construction phase. This will be removed, and as part of the EI study, we will be looking around the spoil and the spoil pipelines and where that would go and what we will be doing with some of the typical spoil disposal mechanisms that's in place. And then we will also have other supporting infrastructures on the site. On the bottom right will be your normal office buildings, your laboratories that we will use to run the plant and test chemical items and the like, the maintenance workshops, in canteen facilities on site. So that's the normal factory type environment that you will typically see on any power plant. Those will be on the site as well as our temporary fuel storage and waste storage and packaging facilities, where we will be disposing of normal waste as well as radioactive waste. Our low level and intermediate level waste will be stored temporarily on site. It will then be packaged and then shipped to the Valpits facility in the Northern Cape. And that will be by road, and we will be shipping the items from site on the road infrastructure under appropriate protection to the licensed facility in the Northern Cape. That's currently the only licensed facility for the storage of radioactive waste that we have, and we'll be using that facility to do that. Next slide, please. So what we're discussing on the next slide really is what we call the plant parameter envelope. And this really is, we've taken various criteria that we believe is important for the plant to specify in terms of the EIA, the requirements that the plant must meet. And we're following this approach because we have not yet selected a specific vendor of a specific technology. So the approach is neutral. It's an acceptable international process. We'll be looking at various technologies and what any vendor that intends to supply a plant to us needs to make sure that their design fits in with the plant parameter envelope that we have specified in this process. So if they fall outside of this, then their design would not necessarily meet our requirements, and we would not be looking at those. So it's important that the plant parameter envelope is understood in that context. Because it's technology neutral, it doesn't favor any specific design, and all the designs that intends to be utilized on site will need to meet the requirements as we specified in the plant parameter envelope. And this is just an approach that we follow to make sure that we are not eliminating any designs at this stage, because we have not yet entered the procurement process for the purchase of a specific reactor technology. Therefore, we're following this approach. And we believe this is the best credible approach to make sure that we have a technology neutral envelope of parameters that we would be able to utilize in the process going forward. And the final technology that we do select will have to fit within the parameters of the envelope. Okay. And then the last slide that I just want to talk to is just some of the important safety features that we consider important as Eskom, that we would like to make sure is understood, and what we're looking for in a typical PWR reactor design for ourselves. The first one, really, we're relying on the use of an increased use of passive safety systems. And really, these are systems where you do not rely necessarily on electricity or immediate human in action that's required to meet a specific objective. You're relying on the forces of nature, like gravity, to pull water down from one system to another, or natural circulation to circulate water, or do heat transfer in specific circumstances. And the use of nature in these issues are powerful to help us meet the objectives of what we're trying to achieve. So we are looking for an increased usage of passive safety systems as opposed to active safety systems where you need electricity and all other mechanisms in place to do certain things. We're looking for simplified designs. The less equipment there are, the less there is to break. So we really don't want an overly complex design that requires a multitude of equipment to deliver specific functions. And we really need it to be simple to operate, simple to design, and simple to maintain. And really to operate in that context makes it easy for us. And a lot of the designs today does rely on simplicity to achieve the design objectives that we require. Then we have what we call the defense in depth process. And this really is a system of multiple layers of defense to achieve a certain function. And we're relying here on making sure that there's a multitude of ways that we can do certain functions, and various layers of defense is added into that to make sure that we can do that. For example, when you're looking at the simple house design, to keep an intruder outside, you would have your windows burglar barred, you'd have a fence outside, and you'd have an alarm system maybe installed on the perimeter of your property. Those give you various levels of defense to achieve the same objective in what you're trying to achieve, and it just demonstrates the defense in depth principle, that you use various levels of defense to meet your safety criteria that we're looking at. Coupled with that is what we also have the concept of redundancy. And redundancy for us is very important because here we're relying on totally diverse means of achieving the same safety objective. For example, we all know how some pumps or motors operate. Some of them does require electricity to turn it. But you also get steam-driven pumps or air-driven pumps or different means which provide you a different means of driving the pump through different forces, and that's what we're looking at in terms of redundancy. Also, you might need one pump to do a specific function, and redundancy would then require you have two of exactly the same pumps being able to do that and deliver the same functionality for you, so you duplicate and give you that redundancy in those instances. That helps us to achieve their objectives. The plant also has to be robust against extreme environmental events, and so we are looking at what the designs have matured to take into account the extreme environmental events, and here we're looking at tsunamis, we're looking at hurricane strength winds, and making sure that the plants would be able to withstand those. Higher seismic hazard analysis would have been conducted, and to see how robust the plant is against such phenomena, to go through that. And finally is the concept of what we call a low core damage frequency. It's really a measure around the possibility or the probability of fuel damage, and this number needs to be as low as possible for us to achieve a specific design objective, and it's in the orders of millions of years that we're looking at the probability of an event happening, and the lower this number is, the better it is from a design, and we will be relying on seeing what the specific design score damage frequency is in the overall assessment of what we're looking at. Actually, that is me. Thank you. I'll hand it back to you.
Thank you so much. Yeah, that's great. Thanks. Right, moving on into the final part of the presentation. In terms of proposed alternatives, the scoping report in Chapter 6 does go through a number of different alternatives. I think it is important to remember that in terms of the EIA regulations, the alternatives that are considered into the EIA phase must be feasible, reasonable, and viable for implementation. So in terms of the scoping phase, what we have looked at is site alternatives, the energy alternatives, design alternatives, and then of course the no-go alternative. The Chapter 11 in the scoping report outlines the alternatives that are proposed or recommended to go through to the EIA phase. These are obviously then also, we await the DFFE's confirmation on if they agree with those recommendations. But there's quite a considerable discussion of these different alternatives in Chapter 6. In terms of the siting alternatives, we do have Bantam's Klip, which is sitting between the sort of Pearly Beach, just sort of down the coast from Pearly Beach and Gans Bay. We've also looked at the Tacepin site, which sits between Oyster Bay and Cape St. Francis or St. Francis Bay, and the Sea Vista area. So we have been looking at those. Also, if we just go back to the alternative slide, we have looked at a number and discussed quite a number of energy alternatives, looking through coal, gas, renewables, and nuclear. And a number of design alternatives. And it really is in terms of the design alternatives that the most of the recommendations sit in terms of the EIA phase, looking at various different alternatives here for footprint, cooling, water intake and discharge, dredging activities, spoil disposal, etc. There are a number already being considered, and that we've recommended for more in-depth investigation. And the one alternative that has to go through into the EIA phase is that of the no-go. If we look at the Commission specialist studies, we've got a number of specialist studies. The scoping phase includes their baseline outlines in Chapter 8. There's also some baseline and sensitivity information in Chapter 9 of the scoping report. Chapter 10 of the scoping report outlines their preliminary impacts that they've identified, mitigation measures as well. And through that, we have used their information to move in terms of deciding on preferred site. Looking at some of the sensitivity mapping, this is something that wouldn't have been required in the previous EIA. It is a new requirement from the department. These maps will be updated for going forward. But this is the Bantam's Klip map. You can see the closeness of various protected areas, as well as the heritage sort of hashed area along the coast. We are aware that is clipped for the site itself, but we're very much aware that these sites do move up and down the coast in both directions. The same is for the Tacepin map. There is the small nature reserve to the east of the site, as well as a number of different heritage sites that are along the coast, or both, so as we said, continuing both up and down. The red areas are your critical biodiversity areas, and your green areas are critical biodiversity area 2s. So there are definitely some sensitive areas in and around the areas that we are looking at on both of those two different sites. In terms of where we go from now, the chapter 10 is the preliminary impacts and mitigation measures that have been identified. These are definitely not the finals. These will be interrogated further into the EIA phase. Some impacts may fall off, some may be added. But yes, this is really just the starting point, and a place to start in terms of what the impacts may or may not be. We have looked at that in much more detail in the next phase will be the cumulative impacts going forward. What we did ask at this stage of the specialists was to look at the impacts on both Bantamsklip and Tastepunt, and to see what, in terms of their various perspectives and aspects, was in terms of their preferred site. It wasn't weighted. We merely asked the specialists to say from their point of view which one was preferred. And then we used this into our discussion in terms of which preferred site would be recommended for the EIA phase. Just as a summary, 4 sites looked at Bantamsklip as being preferred. 2 sites did note Bantamsklip, but that Tastepunt could also be suitable. 8 sites picked Tastepunt, and 11 were neutral that either site would be suitable. Further to this, so based on those, Tastepunt, but adding to this the current readiness of the site in terms of site safety and licensing and the NNR processes. The Bantamsklip is very far down, not very far away from being sort of ready on that front. Also on the grid integration, there is definitely bigger risks and more remoteness in terms of the transmission network, and Tastepunt is easier to connect to the grid. So that also came into play. So at this stage, the preferred site is recommended to be Tastepunt. But as we say, this will be put to the DFFE for them to decide what needs to happen. They could say they agree. They could come back and say we need to still consider both in the EIA phase. So the ultimate decision of which site, or whether 2 sites have to go into the next phase, will be for the DFFE to decide. I think it is, though, good to note that Bantamsklip, although not preferred at this stage, wasn't fatally flawed and could still be considered for future development. Yeah, and that is where I come to an end. I think I'd just like to note that we're still in the scoping phase. People do have until the 25th of May to submit their comments on the report. They all have to be responded to in the comment and response report that goes into the final scoping report. We do capture every single comment that we receive. You're welcome to send us an email. You can scan the QR code that is on your screen. That'll take you to the online registration and comment form. You can use that as well. And as I say, you're welcome to send us an email or even give us a call. So there's still some time, another 20 days from today. So you're welcome to get hold of us through that. And then back to you, Tony, with just a reminder of the participation guidelines.
Thank you very much to our presenters. I really appreciate your being mindful of the time. Yes, I think a couple of people joined after we shared the meeting conduct. Just a request to please raise your hand and use the raise your hand function if you'd like to speak. I'll call on participants in sequence. I see that a lot of comments have already been raised in the chat. Please keep so they are noted and they will be recorded and included in the comments and response report. I'm going to ask our participants, please keep your input concise and focused so that we can give as many people as possible an opportunity to ask their questions. And just as a general guideline, maximum 2 questions or comments per person per turn. If we move towards the end of the meeting and there's still many hands up, I may need to step in. It's not to cut anyone off, but just to ensure fair access for everyone. I'm going to open the floor for comments, and you are welcome to raise your hand if you have any comments and questions. I can maybe, while people think, just quickly summarize the questions that we've had. I really appreciate the inputs. There's questions about the nature of the proposed activity and a request for clarity on exactly what's being applied for and assessed at this stage. I think, Ashley, that's a specific question to the EAP. And I think if you can just maybe consider that. There's also questions about the need for and the affordability of nuclear, especially in comparison to alternatives such as renewables, wave energy, green hydrogen, as well as the choice of uranium over thorium. I think let me take a little bit of a pause there and just give Ashley and Eskom an opportunity to respond. So Ashley, just what exactly is the nature of the activity that you are applying for and that will be assessed?
Perfect. So I can do that one, and then the second one on the cost differences will go to Sidika. But in terms of the actual what has been applied for, that will be that actually there's a lot of detail in our chapter 4, which is the project description. It's for a 5,200 megawatt nuclear power plant based at one of the sites that we've looked at so far in the scoping phase. There are a number of different infrastructure components that go along with that, and those are all detailed in chapter 4. There's a sort of a summary table as well, which is general site information in front of the document for the scoping report. Let's look at, but at the end of the day, it is the 5,200 megawatt nuclear power plant and the associated infrastructure that goes with that. And with that, I'll hand over to Sidika for the second question.
On the thorium.
On the thorium and the
uranium.
The uranium, yes. Yeah.
Yes, I see the hands that have been raised. I will move to you swiftly after the response. Thank you.
Sorry, can we just get clarity? Can you just repeat the question for me?
Sure.
I don't want to make the wrong answer.
So the question was around the need for and affordability of nuclear. So how will the project be funded and how will people be able to afford it, especially in comparison to alternatives such as renewables, wave energy and green hydrogen, and then also the choice of uranium over thorium, for example. And I think the concern there is related to radioactivity.
Okay, so one of the questions that thanks Tony. So I'm just going to respond on the question related to the funding of the project. The project, we are looking at the funding options. There is a funding model that is being developed, the detail of which we will also be subject to the economic assessment that will be performed later. But we're looking at funding partners to come in to support us in this initiative with the project. In terms of that cost, we don't have that cost as yet, and we are looking at partners to come in to support us on that. In terms of the energy mix, in terms of renewables, in terms of new generation coal or hydroelectric schemes and the like, that's all determined in the Integrated Resource Plan of 2025 that has been published recently. And it clearly outlines that there's a clear energy mix that will be used, and nuclear is part of that mix. It does specify 5,200 megawatts of nuclear energy to be deployed by 2039. That's what we're working with. And it's not the one against the other. We're looking at using all the technologies in the country to reach that objective for the energy plan as laid out in the IRP 2025. And then the technology we're looking at, there is no currently commercial thorium nuclear reactor out there. Uranium is the primary source for PWRs, and that's the technology that we are pursuing. We're not pursuing a first-of-a-kind type of technology. We're looking for a proven design that meets the requirements that we set out, that's there, and not an experimental pressurized water reactor. That's what we're looking at for that. And then the follow-on question is we're also looking at the future around small modular reactors. And that is an exciting field that is busy developing. There isn't a lot of commercially available SMRs available at this moment in time, but we are watching that, and we are planning to deploy small modular reactors that meets our requirements as well as part of this rollout. Thank you, Tony.
Thank you. I just swiftly saw a question about who is representing Eskom here. It's Deirdre Harps and Sadiqa Tofi. I am going to move over now to our hands that have been risen. Thank you for your patience. Jacques, please go ahead with your question.
Hi, good evening, everybody. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can hear you clearly.
All right. I see a lot of questions regarding Danafontein, and I must confess I haven't been involved previously. And then obviously not showing why Danafontein wasn't a preferred site because of the location next to existing plant, with all the knowledge and infrastructure and the grid. And then my second question would be or maybe a proposal, just for more public understanding, would be to have a bit of a project life cycle. So should the environmental impact study go through and get approved, what is the next phase and how long will it take and who will be involved? I think just as an overview, that will give people a lot more confidence, because we're focusing only on the first phase, but a lot of people would like to understand what lies ahead in the next 4 or 5 years and how we're going to get there. That's my two questions. Okay.
Thank you very much, Jacques. I'm going to ask the team to please respond. Why was Danafontein not a preferred site? It's also a question that came up in the chat. I think that's for Eskom.
Thanks, Tony. Deirdre will answer those two questions.
Thank you, and good evening, everybody. Good question in terms of Danafontein. So we carried out an environmental impact assessment some time ago, and we got approval for a 4,000 megawatt Danafontein site. The environmental authorization was appealed. The appeals were not upheld. So in last year, in July 2025, we were issued with the environmental authorization, and it's valid for another 10 years. So Danafontein is actually the site that we are planning on developing first, and that would then be followed by a second site. And then maybe I must just give context to that. So there's 5,200 megawatts planned in the current integrated resource plan. As part of that, they also have said that they may consider or investigate a larger amount of nuclear in the future, up to 10,000 megawatts. So the one aspect is that there's a significant capacity of nuclear that is being investigated, and we need more than one site. If we are developing the 5,200 megawatts identified in the current IRP, and we need to construct them by 2039, we would not be able to just develop one site and complete it all on one site. So the current approach would be considered if we get the environmental authorizations resolved. Then it would be that we would start with a couple of units at Danafontein, which is next to Kuburg, and that would be shortly followed by another 2 units on whichever site was then selected as the second site. And maybe that brings to your second part of the question, in terms of what happens. What are we planning? What else happens in the next 5 years? So the environmental impact assessment is only but one authorization that's required. And I think in Ashley's presentation, she referred to the National Nuclear Regulator. So we have to get nuclear installations site license, which is called the NISL, and you'll see it referred to quite often. And that's just to get access to the site or approve the site for a nuclear installation. And then there's also the nuclear operating license that needs to be required to be obtained. And then there's a Section 34 that needs to be obtained as well from the DEE. And then NERSA would also have to approve the operation of a nuclear power station as well as part of their process. So there are many processes that still need to be followed. And I think you would have noticed that Sadiqa also talked about obtaining funding and looking for partners in funding. So that also needs to be sourced before we can actually hit the go button and start with construction. So a lot needs to happen in order for us to move forward with this nuclear power station. The EIA is just one part of that. Thanks.
Thank you, Deirdre, for responding. I see there are a lot of follow-up questions that's being asked in the chat, but I'm going to give our participants a chance who have their hands up. So Melikaya, you are next. Thank you very much.
Good evening to everyone. My name is Melikaya Lani. I'm from the Eastern Cape Combined Environmental Forum, which is being constituted of the community-based organizations that are existing around the Nelson Mandela municipality down towards your Kouga municipality. Mine is I will say it's a sort of a clarity-seeking comment, if I may say so, with regards to the key components of the project that were presented by Eskom. I just forget the guy that presented here. He spoke of mine is only on the issue of that he spoke of the turbines, the water turbine that will be cooled from the condensers, from the condenser in terms of your construction of the nuclear power plant. And that mine is the issue of that. I know those coolants will be going down through the oceans. So where they will be cooled off and then going back to the condenser. And that mine is that have got to do with the impact that is going to cause around the ocean life or the aqua life. Because remember, as I have said, that we are constituted of community-based organization. We've got our folks, our fisher folks who are part of us who have got concerns around that, because it has got to do with the impacting their jobs, where they are putting food on their fellow families,
Yes.
And the other one, and the other one has got to do with the cooling water system. As I've said, it has got to do with those key components. This has got to do with the cooling water system, which is the seawater desalination plant. And that now it raises concerns to me, because in my understanding, when you speak of your desalination plant, there's brine that is going to be a waste on that process, which comes from the desalination plant, and as well as the intensive use of electricity on the process of a desalination plant or in its operation. What then is going to happen with that brine? Is it going to be disposed on the ocean as well? And the other issue is the intensive use of that electricity within the desalination plant. Where is that electricity going to come from? And the other issue has got to do, and the other issue has got to do with the jobs credibility. Could you? I'm just finishing now. The other issue has got to do with the jobs credibility. Remember, because now we're speaking with the two plants, which is your desalination plant and your nuclear power plant, which is going to be built. I'm asking myself about the affordability around that, because we understand the nuclear power plant is expensive on its own, and that now within the construction place or on the key component of the project, we're adding now the desalination plant. So those are my concerns. And the other issues have got to do with socioeconomic issues, which is the infrastructure incapabilities around the Kouga municipality. I'm worried about the influx that is going to happen there, because in terms of the infrastructure, I'm worried about the clinics, your sewer, roads, and all that that have got to do. How is it then going to be dealt with? Because in terms of history, now that we are speaking with these issues, I'm being reminded of the history. I'm referring myself to what has happened in terms of history with Lipalale in Limpopo. So I would like some sort of clarity around those issues. Thank you very much, ma'am. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Milikaya, for your issues. If I can just maybe briefly summarize, you would like clarity with regards to the impacts of the water turbines and the thermal heat. Will it warm the ocean? And then what will be the impact of brine and how will that be discharged? You're concerned about the impacts on the livelihoods of coastal communities and specifically fishers who are dependent on the ocean, and given the associated activities linked to this nuclear and desalination plant, how that will impact the livelihoods of the fishers, and then also concern about the cost. And I think it's not just the cost related to the building of these plants, but what impact will it have on people's pockets? And then from a socioeconomic perspective, the concern is influx and the ability of the Kouga local municipality to manage service provision, especially given historic context and also historic evidence that exists that municipalities struggle to manage the impacts of these large infrastructure projects. So Ashley, if I can maybe ask you to deal with the impacts assessment that will be done and how that will be dealt with. And Sadiqa, if I can ask you to respond to just explain how precisely what the impact of that thermal heat is on the ocean that will be generated by the process.
Thanks, Antoinette. Thank you, Milikaya, for all your comments. We've received similar comments during all our previous public meetings over the last few weeks, and we've taken note of all of them. And it's definitely issues that our various specialists will be looking across the socioeconomic specialists, the marine ecologists, the tourism guys, the yeah, I think there's a number of the oceanography specialists. And they all are aware of these questions and concerns. So I can say there's no particular answers at this stage. The impacts are still being investigated, and they will be included in the EIA phase. So I think from that point of view, but we have received similar comments and concerns across the board from our other meetings. So thank you for those. Sadiqa?
Thanks, Ashley. I think you covered my question as well, because the question of the thermal heat load of the cooling water, we've spoken about that previously, but really what our experience is showing, and the studies will confirm that in the subsequent phase, that normally the seawater temperature, by the time it within a meter or two, a small radius at the outfall, the heat dissipates and it's back to ambient temperature. You will not see localized heating to the extent that is of concern, but marine studies will confirm that. The intent with the brine is to return that, to dilute that with the outfall water going into it will return back to the ocean where it originates from. So that's part of that process. And it's not a large-scale desalination plant. It's a desalination plant sufficient for the needs of the power plant to do that. And it will be fed off the power plant supplies as part of the operating cost of the production that's there. And I think the rest of the questions, actually, you've spoken to the livelihood of the fishes. That's part of the socioeconomic impact studies, as well as the socioeconomic infrastructure capabilities that needs to be upgraded. There will be upgrades needed on specific infrastructure in and around the site that needs to be done for the successful completion of the project. So some of the infrastructure is not sufficient to meet the current needs of the project, and we will have to upgrade those appropriately to meet the needs of the project.
Thank you very much. Thank you, Sadiqa and Ashley. Yes, I just want to say that, while we may not be able to respond to all the questions that are asked, these questions are critical to shape the terms of reference for the specialists that will be undertaking these studies. And those detailed responses can be provided in the impact assessment phase once they have assessed the impacts, and these will then be shared with our stakeholders. Gary, you're up next. Thank you very much.
Tony, good evening to you, and hello again, and hello to everyone else. Thank you for the opportunity. If I can just say that my understanding of an EIA process is that it doesn't offer the developer a blank check nor a ready-made solution for their preferred option, but that it's meant as a process of integrity that looks at all the options. So the things that I'd like some clarity on, the first one is just the maths that Deirdre was talking about earlier, the numbers. In your presentations to interested parties here in Nelson Mandela Bay, the municipality, Kucha, and the business chamber, you've indicated that you will build a plant of 4,800 at Tastement and a 400 megawatt SMR at Kucha. You already have 4,000 approved for Danafontein. And given you have a 10-year window, I would assume that you've already started the procurement process on that. And then you have 5,200 that's been included in the EAP, in the IRP, but your project is titled up to 5,200 megawatts. So you're not very clear in terms of how many megawatts. And the second point is the thing about the envelope, the technology envelope. The person from Eskom has said that you will not consider thorium because thorium is not commercially available at this point in time, but you are going to include small modular reactors that are not commercially available at this point in time. So how do you plan for an activity that is at this point in time theoretical and not practical? And then the final thing is just in terms of the siting, my understanding from your documentation is that your siting, which came down to 2 sites only, is based on an 80s study that had certain parameters that are no longer viable. Would you be providing that siting report? And can you help us understand why you included Bantam's Klip in the options as alternatives and have excluded them, or in terms of your scoping, will exclude them for exactly the same reasons as you did in the previous processes? Thanks, Tony. I appreciate that.
Thank you. Thank you. I'm going to hand straight over to Deirdre for responding. Deirdre or Sadiqa, thank you.
Okay, I think between myself and Sadiqa, we can respond. And there was a lot of questions in there, so Gary will do our best to respond to them. So maybe just to clarify in terms of up to 5,200, and that we've already from my point of view. And I did see that in the chat. I think it was Jane that was saying, well, how could we be developing both sites just because of cost? So it's not because of cost. It is a big construction site. And if you are wanting to develop and commission 5,200 megawatts of nuclear, you can't do it all on one site. So you would need to split the construction across more than one site so that you could actually achieve the timelines that are proposed in the integrated resource plan. So it's not for cost reasons that we do that, but really about developing and construction of a significant plant. Tony, do you want to remind me of? I think in terms of the SMR proposed at Coega, I'm not the person to answer. Sadiqa, I'm not. You are
Sorry. Sorry, Deirdre, can I just want to interrupt. There's some interference from your side. I'm not sure if our stakeholders are experiencing the same interruption. You seem to come and go a little bit. Can I just check with our stakeholders online if you can hear Deirdre clearly without interruption? Yes. Okay, so maybe that's just on my side. Thank you. Please continue.
Yeah. So maybe our speaker can just refer to the plant parameters.
Hi, Deirdre. Yeah, so in terms of the question was on Coega. We are looking at possibly the suitability of Coega to potentially host an SMR. What I need to correct in Gary's assessment around SMRs, there currently are 2 SMRs in operation in the world that has been constructed, and there are quite a few other SMRs that are being constructed. So the SMRs are much nearer to full commercial options than a thorium reactor. There's no thorium reactors currently being constructed. There's been quite a few SMRs that has been designed and they are in various stages of design, 2 in commercial operation, and there are others under construction in different countries around the world, and we are monitoring those and looking at keeping options available around what those would do and what those would meet. They would still need to meet our plant parameter envelope requirements at this moment. So we are not excluding them because we do believe that they are much more mature some of them are much more mature in the design approach to what we're looking at, but it's not for the next 5 years. The current focus is an approved design, approved licensable design and plant that has an operating experience that we can rely upon. And that's where our target initially is for large PWR reactors. And the intent is to deploy them on both sites, as Deirdre has mentioned. We will start at Dynfontein that has an approved environmental authorization, and then the next site being either Tasman or Bantam's Klip for the remainder of the 5,200 megawatts. And between the 2 sites, we will need to optimize the planning and the deployment appropriately to meet that requirement.
Thank you. I think there was also a question on the siting report from the 80s, and you know, if that report can be made available.
Yeah, so I think that we have agreed that we can make the part of the report available, or the report available. But Gary was asking, I believe, why has that report influenced the site that we've taken for this environmental impact assessment? Yes, it certainly has. It was a long time ago that we carried out that assessment, but it was a very, very detailed and comprehensive assessment of the South African coastline, with some exclusions. Specifically, the homelands at that point of view were excluded. So the Transkei, Ciskei areas were excluded from the study, but the rest of the coastline was studied very comprehensively. And then 5 sites were identified. 2 of the sites are on the way up on the west coast, and those have been excluded for transmission line reasons, grid reasons, and that was in the previous process. And as many of you know, there are still constraints from a grid perspective in that area. That we would not be developing those 2 sites. But once we had identified, in terms of the National Siting Investigation Program in the 1980s, the sites that were suitable for nuclear, we then continued to do more in-depth studies on those sites. So it's very important on a nuclear site that you have in-depth studies carried out from a geotechnical site, invested in those properties over the years. So certainly that is some of the reasons that we have identified Donofontein, which is already being developed, Tastepunt and Bantam's Klip.
Thank you. I think this concern about the report from the 80s has been raised during our public meetings as well. Can I just get an indication if that will be available on the website, WSP's website, and the Data Free website for people, or how will it be made available? Maybe Ashley, if you can just confirm that for us before we move on.
Yeah, we would make it available on the 2 websites, and then just let people know once it's there.
Okay, so can we get an indication of time?
No, can we come back to you on?
Okay. All right. Thank you. So we will get back to you, and WSP will inform stakeholders once that report is available. Thank you. We're going to move on to Mornay. Mornay, thank you for your patience. You're still muted. If you can just unmute yourself.
Hear me now?
Yes, I can hear you. Thank you.
Thank you. Being a resident in the Kouga area, we've got a big concern being nuclear. We all know what happened to Chernobyl what happened to Chernobyl, all the evacuations, all the people. A lot of development has happened since the impact study of Tastepunt has been done in the 1980s. They look at St. Francis, the way it was developed, Jeffreys Bay. These areas have developed tremendously, and a lot of people are standing to lose one hell of a lot. Say, for argument's sake, working on nuclear, and this is nuclear, there is always a chance, no matter how careful you are, that something can go wrong. And obviously you have a safety zone with the evacuation zone and so forth around, say for argument's sake, would be Tastepunt. What is going to happen to all the people that's being impacted? Obviously they are being evacuated, but what about their livelihoods, their investment in capital in the area, and so forth, all of that? Are they going to be reimbursed for that by Eskom if something would go wrong? Or what is its stance on something like that? Because obviously we're talking about huge sums of money here that people are standing to lose if something like that would happen. I'm not saying, and God forbid, that something like that would happen, but say for argument's sake, something like that would happen. What is the stance? Where are we standing with something like that?
Thank you, Mornay, for your question. So if I hear you correctly, there's concern about evacuation, if there's evacuation procedures in place in the event of an emergency, and what recourse will people have in the event of a major incident? So I think we're going to ask Eskom to please respond. Sidika, can you respond, please?
Yeah, I think this question has also come up before, and it's not understood. So, in terms of an incident, if an incident should happen, it's very low probability that it would. We, as the operator, Eskom as the operator, are mandated to take out a nuclear liability insurance, which would be, and it's governed by the regulator that we need to have this insurance. And this is what would be used in the unlikely event of a nuclear incident to recompensate the losses incurred because of the event. So the nuclear liability clauses that we do have is earmarked towards that resolution.
Thank you.
Danny.
Can I just check, is that something that is that will be, that information, will it be shared with the stakeholders, and at what point is it typically shared? And then Ashley, for you, is this aspect being assessed as part of the impact assessment? I think many people are worried about that, and they don't understand how it works. So if you can just expand a little bit on that.
I don't know if Sidika, I don't know if you want to just comment on how stakeholders are made aware of that.
Yeah, I think through the nuclear licensing process, the NNR.
Okay.
Sidika, do you want to just talk to that, the NNR process?
Yeah, before I jump in on the other bit.
Yeah, so as I said, we're mandated to have the nuclear liability insurance to deal with that, and that's regulated by our regulator. And as part of the nuclear installation site license and the nuclear installation license applications, that's still to follow through. After this process, we'll have another opportunity to pose that question to the regulator as well, how that is being regulated. But we're basically required by the regulator to install this. It would become a part of our license conditions to operate the plant, that we do have a workable, you have to demonstrate the viability of an emergency plan. That's one of the conditions of the license that we need before we go operate the plant. And as part of the license conditions, we will need to demonstrate the viability of an emergency plan. And then as part of the other license conditions, we do need to have a nuclear liability insurance as well. In terms of sharing that information, I'll come back to you on that, Tony, Ashley, around how that is shared and on that.
Thank you. So can we then also share that a lot of that information will also be shared through a public participation process that forms part of the NNR's separate process that will be run?
Yeah, but I'll just have to talk to Ashley whether this is actually going to be covered under the one of the studies on the socioeconomic impacts assessments. Okay. I'm not sure if it's covered there or not. Thank you.
Thank you.
I believe that it is something that has come up often enough that the socioeconomic study will be looking into this. The other studies that are looking at emergency planning is we do have an emergency planning report and a beyond design included in the EIA phase. So they will likely also pick up on these issues in terms of insurance and, emergency plans and zones, etc. So those will be part of those studies as well.
Okay, thank you. Thank you for bearing with me. Right, Ethan, thank you for your patience. I hope I've pronounced your name correctly. You're welcome to proceed.
Good evening and thank my surname. Hi, can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Okay, my question will be short and concise, and it does relate to planning when it comes to power export into the national grid. Now, my assumption, and please correct me if I'm wrong, my assumption is that Thuispunt, if it ever breaks ground, power will be exported to grassroots transmission station. I want to find out, has land lease or servitude agreements been entered into with neighboring landowners of the proposed site? And yeah, what would be the route to get access to the SLDs or the proposed route of this infrastructure?
Are you talking specifically about the transmission lines, or are you talking about more than that?
Specifically the transmission lines, that's correct. Thanks, that's my question.
Okay, thank you very much. Right, I think that is a question for Eskom.
Okay, thanks for that question. So in terms of servitudes for the transmission lines, no, that has not taken place yet. What we are doing, we as any other generating utility would have to apply to the NTCSA, the National Transmission Company of South Africa, first of all, we need to get quotations from them. We need to ask them to carry out studies, and we are in the process of doing that. And once that is determined, they will then complete the environmental impact assessments for the transmission lines. We would still need to, we have some from previous EIA, some preliminary routes that were identified. But those would have to be updated and relooked at. So at this stage, we do not have servitudes for the transmission line.
Right, thank you. Sorry, Deirdre, did you respond to the question about the land lease agreements and whether any has been agreed to with neighbours or adjacent landowners?
So I think in the environmental impact, in the scoping report, the sites that we have purchased are clearly demarcated and shared. But I understood the question to be related to the transmission lines and not to the actual generation site. So the generation site, we have purchased most of the properties that we require for the power plant, as well as the emergency planning zones. But we have not purchased any or leased any land for the transmission lines.
Right, thank you. Thank you very much for that response. Can I just check if there are any more questions? It is 7:23. We still have time till 8 o'clock. Francesca, please proceed. You're not audible. I'm not sure if it's from my side only. Can I check with the team if they can hear? Yes, you can hear. Thank you. Francesca? I see that you are unmuted, but there's no sound. At least not on my side. So maybe I will hold, I will give you an opportunity maybe after Jacques again. Gary, if you don't mind, let's go with Jacques in the meantime to give Francisco an opportunity to just sort out the sound.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, I can hear you.
Good. We're also having a lot of rain lately. Yeah, maybe it's just a bit of feedback to everybody listening as well. You know, there's a lot of concerns from general public on the safety and you know, around the nuclear. I worked at the nuclear plant, and I can ensure you the safety procedures and processes are in place, and it's managed in a proper way. And I think also the technology that is future applicants will be far more advanced than what the current plant life extension has taken us. And this is something that should have been done 20 years ago. Then we won't sit in this, sort of a rush process to try and get everybody across the line. But I do have a concern is, as I said earlier on, is beyond this report, and what is the infrastructures? Has someone sat down and thought about the municipalities and the support, and as I asked earlier on, the roads and getting equipment onto the projects? Because then we end up with a project taking 10, 15, 20 years from now. We're talking about 2030, 2029, but we all realistically know how long these things take, especially in South Africa. We take our efficiencies, then basically will it take, what is the mitigation in between? What is to ensure the grid and the grid is stable going forward in the next 3, 4, 5, 6 years? So what is the thought behind that going into the bigger nuclear future if it all goes through and gets a process? Thank you.
Thank you for that, Jacques. I'm not sure who to direct this question to, but I suspect it's a mix between Eskom and Ashley.
Yeah, so I think Ashley can talk to what is being covered in the environmental impact assessment. But yeah, thanks for the question, Jacques. Certainly, we can say that we learned many lessons from the Medupi and Kusile projects, and in that case, those projects were initiated quite late, and we were already going into a supply constraint situation, which eventually did lead to load shedding. So in this case, and so we basically did the environmental impact assessment, and the following year we were turning soil and starting with construction, with not a lot of upfront planning. In the case of the nuclear infrastructure, the nuclear power plants, it's quite a different situation. We have been working on this for some time. So the road access has already been looked at, what we would be required to do for additional infrastructure. We've looked at where we may situate a construction camp as well, and the access to the site, how the access would best be, from which side of the, in the case of Taspin, from which side would best access be to get to the plant to have the least disruption. And in the previous process, it was proposed that would be through Humansdorp, but not through the centre of Humansdorp. So a route was identified, and on the Oyster Bay side access, and then limiting impact on the other route, which is from the St. Francis Bay side. So a lot of the infrastructure and municipal discussions have taken place in the past, and will continue to do so with both with the sites that will go forward into the environmental impact assessment, whether it's just Taspin or whether both sites, depending on what the authorities decide. And there's a lot better preparation than we have had with a couple of our other large infrastructure projects that we carried out previously. So a little bit of comfort, but doesn't mean that we're not focusing on it and making sure that we need to do what we need to prepare for.
Yeah, and I think that from a EIA perspective, sorry, just falling over my tongue. From an EIA perspective, both the traffic impact assessment is also looking into those alternatives and the options that have been identified, and we'll make comment on those. Also, the socioeconomic impact assessment is looking at the different options. Even though, you know, a construction camp may need a new EIA, they're still looking at where maybe the best place to put it is the proposed area a good spot, what considerations are there that need to be taken into account. So the EIA is set up to take those previous discussions and consider the options and potentially even if there are sort of different options that need to be in place, that they can be added to the discussion or things that may still need to be looked at. So the EIA is there in place. And I know Deirdre wanted to add one more thing.
Yeah, so just in terms of timing, the integrated resource plan, and obviously this getting baseload electricity supply added to ensure security of supply is going to be important, because we are taking off or planned in the IRP 8 gigawatts of coal will come off in 2030. But there are other technologies that have been planned in terms of the integrated resource plan from gas and renewables that will also be coming online prior to the nuclear plant. So maybe reference to the integrated resource plan to see the mix of technologies that are planned to make sure that we have security of supply, and the process the 5,200 by 2039. So the amount of the time that it will take is that we would start construction in 2030. Are they showing a picture up?
Yes.
Starting with construction in 2030 and delivering the capacity by 2039.
Thank you, Deirdre. I think, actually, I just want to pursue a point. So in terms of will the EIA consider the long-term future impacts and the cumulative impacts of these associated infrastructure, support to the grid? Will all of those aspects form part of the terms of reference of the different specialist studies that you've mentioned? I think people just need to seek certainty around that.
So
Yeah.
it won't be specific. So we won't be undertaking the impact assessment for the power. From a cumulative point of view, they will take the fact that those need to be done into account. So there's not going to be a full assessment of all the impacts that a power line or the construction camp would have on its own, but more to the point of the cumulative issue in terms of the socioeconomic aspects more specifically, especially when we look at the construction camp. Like, yes, there will need to be one, and from that, yes, there will be influx of external people from outside of town, you know, that sort of, so those sort of impacts would be considered in the cumulative part of it. So it would be included there.
Thank you. Can you just quickly remind us again where, in which appendice of the scoping report are these terms of references?
The terms of references are in the chapter 11 of the scoping report. And they will be also updated to include any of the items and issues that INAPs have highlighted where we need to add that. So it'll be updated in the final scoping report.
Okay, thank you very much. Thanks. Francisco, let's try again.
Hi, good evening.
You are audible. Thank you.
Thank you.
Good evening.
Part of my question has already been covered. My question is, I know that is not part of the current EIA, but all this land that is going to be expropriated or forced servitudes on from the site to the highway, is it going to be part of an EIA at any stage?
Thank you. That's a good question. Ashley, can you respond? And I think Deirdre also need to respond.
I think it's so for the facility itself, there's no expropriation. Eskom already own all the land that they need to for the facility. In terms of power lines, that's not part of our scope of this EIA, but they, even with the EIAs that I've been involved with transmission over the years, previously, they look at a win-win, willing buyer, willing seller type of thing, even on the transmission line side. So I have, I think, once ever seen the previous Eskom transmission do an expropriation, and it's just not typically what they do. So I don't think expropriation is an issue at all. But for the facility, for this EIA, for the facility purpose, the land that is required is all owned by Eskom.
Yeah, nothing to add. The expropriation is not generally used in either of any of our studies, but an EIA will be carried out for the transmission line.
And
what about the highway that you're planning to build between the current highway and the site? That is all land that belongs to farmers in the area. Will that be expropriated? Because the Expropriation Act today allows for expropriation of the land for this kind of use. So is that what is to be expected? That's my question.
So you're talking about the access road?
Yes, the access road.
Yeah, so that well, obviously the details of that will be included in the environmental impact assessment in terms of exactly where the road would go. But my understanding is, yes, it will go sort of around Humansdorp from the previous study that was done, and it obviously needs to be relooked at, and then follow the Oyster Bay Road, but not an expansion of the Oyster Bay Road, but not a highway. So that was my recollection of the transport study that was carried out previously and will be reconsidered in this process.
So is this going to be taken into account within the EIA or not?
Yes.
So is that the second EIA that is going to be issued?
No, so that access road is included in the scope of this EIA that we're talking about tonight.
Then
But sorry, guys, it's access road right at the site.
Right at the site, yes.
But the route to the site, that will be shared in this EIA, but that will also require a separate EIA of its own. But in the EIA phase, you would be able to see what the proposed routes are from Humansdorp through to the site. And on the Bantamsklip site, the site is right on the freeway, so there's different kind of a little bit easier access from there's different issues when you're trying to get large components from Cape Town to the Bantamsklip site, but in both cases that would be shared in this EIA, but any road infrastructure that needed to be done would have to have a separate EIA because they usually belong to the province.
Central.
Thank you. Ashley, can you just confirm where in the draft scoping report people can find more information about this access road?
The access roads are there is some discussion on them in chapter 4 in the project description. Obviously, much more information will come in the EIA phase.
Thank you. I think people can just have a look at the transport and socioeconomic impact assessment terms of references as well to make sure and submit comments in writing if you are concerned that what we have just discussed is, if you missed that in the report. Gary, I'm going to move on to you.
Thanks, Tony. Appreciate the second opportunity. Just a couple of more questions. It would appear that the applicant, Eskom in this case, is seeking to pick and choose And I think it would be useful for us to understand the rationale behind what you include in the EIA and what you exclude. If I may just give you some examples, you're scoping out Bantam's clip because of the transmission line, but that EIA hasn't been done as far as I understand. You're not including the transmission line EIA for Tailspind, but you are including the access road, even though that needs a separate EIA. And I'm not sure whether Nelson Mandela Bay impacts have been scoped into this exercise. So previously, you would have moved the cores from PE Harbour along Warmer Boulevard and Seaview Road. There's now new highway bridges and things like that. Can you just give us an indication of what your rationale is for how you've included impacts and excluded others? Thank you.
Thank you, Gary. Right. I think this is also a question for both. Deirdre, shall we go with you first?
Yeah, I think Ashley actually in her introduction described the approach in terms of the environmental impact and then assessing the transmission lines. The transmission lines have been looked at in the route of the transmission line, and it was based on that.
Sorry. We have a little bit of feedback. Sorry. Try that again. Apologies.
We heard that.
Just making sure you're awake. That's all.
So we have a certain level of information that we have from that have been carried out historically that we do need to look at, so that we make sure that we've got sufficient information on the transmission lines. But the transmission lines have to be done by the National Transmission Company of South Africa and cannot be done by ourselves. So it is a different, well, it's now a separate company to the Eskom holdings. Yeah, so that's part of the reason.
Yeah, I think I can also come in here and just say that the scope for the CIA is focused on the nuclear power plant, the facility itself. So that which will fall under the operational sort of guidance, or I suppose responsibility of Eskom Generation. So those items where a separate applicant is required, say like the NTCSA, like for example, if it's going to be the Provincial Roads Department or SANROL for that matter, if there's an EIA that's required there, then those need to be different EIAs because of the different applicants. But where, like for example, we are including the access road that Eskom Generation will be responsible for, that is falling into our scope. In terms of the transport routes, those will be looked at from an impact point of view. And as you rightly mentioned, and glad that you did, so we can make sure that they have taken this into account, the changes that may have happened along those routes since the previous EIA, and that will need to be looked at by the transport specialists. But any, for example, upgrades that they identify would need to be done, would they need to be done by and any applicable or associated approvals would then need to be done by the relevant applicant there, whether it be province or SANROL or whoever it might be. But the study, the traffic, for example, that traffic study would need to look at those routes and provide recommendations along those lines. So I think that may assist with the response.
Thank you, Ash. And can you indicate?
Tony?
Sorry, do you want us? I just want to remind them to respond to the question on the Nelson Mandela Bay impacts, and if these have been the associated impacts, Ash, have that been included in the EIA?
Yeah, so that will be in the EIAs. That's what Gary was saying about the transport routes through that area, and that is what the traffic guys will need to be looking at and taking note, as Gary rightly said, the changes on those routes that may have happened or have happened subsequent to the previous studies.
Thank you. Gary, did you have a follow-up on that?
I did, Tony, and if I may, just to point out the inconsistencies in the argument. You're not rethinking the siting, even though things have changed, but you will relook the routing because of changes that have taken place. You're scoping out Bantam's Klip because of transmission lines that need a separate EIA, but you're not doing the EIA for Taspent. You're not considering that scoping thing. You know, so the concern I have is I understand that you are narrow focused on the site itself and the production of up to 5,200 megawatts. We can debate that later. But if you can't have a transmission line, it's a separate company. If they say no, then you can't build a nuclear plant. If Sanrail or whoever builds the roads can't build the road, you can't have a nuclear plant there. Those are critical to the functionality of the development that you're talking about. So I think, you know, I mean, it's late, we don't want to debate this here, but I think what the EAP has to be clear is the rationale behind what you've included and what you've excluded in this process. And our argument would be is that you have to include everything that is critical to the project's success or operational ability, and that certainly would be the road and certainly would be the transmission line. I mean, you were unclear too as to where the construction village is going to go. It's always been Human's job previously. It would be useful to know that, because by my numbers, you're adding 10,412 people to that Humansdorp community, and that's without families included. I know from the municipality that there isn't water for those people. So those are the kind of questions that we need some clarity on, so that we can scope the exercise and assess it properly. Thank you very much.
Thank you for those comments, Gary. I think they are very useful, and indeed some clarity is needed in terms of describing the rationale and the arguments as you've stated, and also the concerns around the construction village. I think the biggest concern is the fragmented approach to the EIA, given the road infrastructure and the transmission lines, and the ability to successfully assess and evaluate the impacts to ensure the operational success of such a facility. So thank you for that. We've noted that, and it's also been recorded. Right, so Neville, you're up next, and thank you for your patience.
Thank you very much for the opportunity. Can you hear me clearly?
Yes, I can hear you clearly.
Thank you. Now, I appreciate the studies, I imagine, predominantly focused on environmental aspects. However, I want to look at things like the economic aspects, and I'm not sure that's the scope of what you're addressing. Given the 3 sites that are under consideration, given of which 2 are preferred, if we take the technical, economical, and environmental aspects into perspective, is there any consideration of which site in the long term gives you the best long-term operational cost of a kilowatt hour of electricity? I believe the term is LCOE, being the levelized cost of electricity. Is there any indication, is that part of the current scope, or is that going to be something in the future? Thank you for the time.
Thank you. Good question. Ash, I'm going to hand over to you.
Yeah, thanks for that. Yeah, so we don't know those at the moment, but we are hoping that the economic study will be able to provide some clarity on that issue. So yes, at this point, from the scoping phase assessments that have been done, the Taspent has come out as preferred, but as we said, we wait for the department to give their approval or decision on that. But yeah, so the economic, there is going to be an economic impact assessment in the next phase. So, and that is something we are hoping they'll be able to outline, but we will definitely make sure that they're aware of the question and the request. Thank you.
Thank you for that response. Right. There's about 10 minutes left of the meeting. I'd like to give everyone an opportunity who would like to still ask questions to do so. But in the meantime, I'm going to ask WSP. There was a question earlier about when the minutes of the public meetings will be made available to the stakeholders.
Okay, so that one is a reasonable request. The minutes take a little bit longer because obviously they're written and do need to go through review. But what we are doing in the meantime is we are uploading the recordings of the public meetings onto our two websites, the WSP website and the Data Free website. So that people can at least have access to those in the meantime while we are still busy with the pulling the detailed minutes together. But we will notify everybody once those recordings are up on the website. We are working on the recordings from the previous two rounds of meetings that happened in April. We're hoping they'll be up by the end of the week, if not the beginning of next week. And then these recordings that we are recording of for today, this evening and tomorrow will then go up shortly thereafter. The written minutes may take a little bit of extra time.
Thank you for that. And then I would also just, sorry, you broke up there, Ash. Could you just repeat your last sentence?
No, I was just going to say we will notify everyone by email.
Okay. Okay, excellent. So I just want to also share with everyone that there will be an additional meeting in Gqeberha on Monday. What's Monday's date? The 11th. On Monday, the 11th of May. Maybe if you can just share the venue with us, Ash, from your side, or to me.
We'll put that in the chat.
Okay.
Milo can put it in the chat, and then I do believe we have the links to the two websites that we can also pop in the chat.
Okay, that will be great. Thank you so much. Cecilia, thank you for your patience. You're welcome to go ahead and ask your question.
Good evening. Mine, you might have discussed it, but I joined in a bit late because I was having problems. What I wanted to know was, for those of us who are literate, we are able to join in using MS Teams, using the links and read on whatever we want to read. I want to know how public participation is going to be undertaken for the less privileged. Thank you.
Thank you. Good question. I'm going to hand over to Ash and WSP to respond to that question.
Yes.
Okay. Yeah.
So we have been having in-person meetings as well. We've had 2 weeks. We've had a week of meetings in the Western Cape. We had a week of meetings in the Eastern Cape. We're back there next week for a PE based meeting. We also have hard copies of the report in the libraries around the various sites. That is for the scoping phase. And we've had everything in 3 languages as far as we can. On the online, we also have some audio summaries of the reports that people can listen to. I do note that, yes, they will need some assistance to get onto the Data Free website, for example, on their phone so they can listen to the audio version. But that is there for those who want to listen to it, also in all 3 languages, English, Afrikaans, and Xhosa. And moving into the EIA phase, we are going to, for then, when we have the draft EIA report, yes, it will be in hard copy in the libraries, etc. again, and on the websites, but we will also be coming down again to the different areas, and we will be having open days where people can come and engage with the EAP and relevant specialists. So we will be definitely communicating that closer to the time. So I really do believe that we've really tried to encompass everybody as far as possible. We're also running a number of different focus group meetings with smaller groups and community groups and say the fishers and ecotourism and that sort of thing to make sure we've considered everybody that we can. Thank you.
Thank you, Ash. Can you please just explain what the purpose of the focus group meetings are? I think a concern was raised in the public domain that these meetings are planned to secure people's buy-in or to ask them to support the project. And I just want the EAP to explain the purpose of the focus group meetings.
So it's very easy. Focus group meetings are not any of what you've just mentioned. It really is to secure sector-specific comments from, say, for example, the fishers, people in ecotourism, people, you know, along the First Nations, for example. So sector-specific comments that we can take into account.
Okay, thank you for clarifying that. Right, are there any last questions that anyone wants to ask? I see that there are very good comments that have been raised in the meeting chat. If there's anything that is critical that anyone wants us to respond to, please raise your hand. There is an opportunity to do so now. Right, if there's not any questions, any last comments from WSP?
Just to say thank you everybody for your time. We really do appreciate. We know that it's 2 hours out of your Tuesday evening. So really very good. Thank you very much for your time and your comments and your input and your participation. We do value it a lot. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much. And then special thanks to all our presenters and to our stakeholders. If you did not get an opportunity to speak, please submit your comments via email or the website. Note that we have recorded your comments in the chat. Please check and verify that they are in the comments and response report once that is shared. That will be critical for you to please make sure that it's been captured. And then just noting that all inputs received within the comment period carry equal weight. Thank you for your time and your engagement. It's a critical part of ensuring that the process is fair and robust. And if you have any suggestions, please contact the Public Participation Office. Thank you so much. We're closing this meeting now. Have a good evening.